Can you see my slides? No. Try again. Can you see the slides now? Yeah, super. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this third session in our series on NIHR I4I seminars. Today's talks will be around IP and commercialization. My name is Roy Harris. I'm a senior advisor in translational research, and today's talks I will open with a look at how the commercialization fits in with your product development as part of an I4I grant, sorting out a few topics that will be relevant to your application. This will be followed by a joint presentation from Carl Edwards and James Finney from the University of Leicester, who will take a deeper look into the importance of IP protection and a good commercialization strategy. And to end this session and this series is Tim Robinson, who will talk about product adoption and how to go about that. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So if you've got any questions, can you please put them into the chat, and we will try and answer as many of these at the end of the sessions, of the talks. Thank you. So, I4I, Invention for Innovation. You can see that when you've got your product ID, oops, here, oh dear. When you've got your product concept, whether it's a prototype or just a concept, this moves along the innovation pathway towards the marketplace and commercialization. However, the IP, the intellectual property associated with your product, is really associated with the original idea. So that comes very early in the process, even before you've even applied for grant funding. The important thing is that the both are linked, that the IP and moving through the innovation pathway towards the marketplace go hand in hand. So even though commercialization is at the end of the process, you need to think about how you're going to get there at the very start. So in terms of intellectual property, NIHR list what they think is what they consider to be covered by intellectual property. I'm not going into this in detail. I know that Carl and James will highlight some of these points later in their talk. Patents and copyright tend to be the main pieces of IP. The thing I want to add here is when you build your team, know-how within that team is very important. Your team are there to help generate IP and help to promote the planning of the commercialization. So the IP timeline, this is looking at patent filing. NIHR expect your product to be, or your technology to be protected very early on, so they're assured that nobody's going to steal your idea. There is a cost involved, and luckily NIHR will pay for reasonable patent costs. So as long as when you get to national filing, you're not trying to file in every country in the world, which would be extortionate cost-wise, then these costs are covered. Two interesting times along the pathway of filing is the 18-month publication of your patent. This is where people actually see what your patent claims are. Also, it's when you can see other people's patents and their claims. So it's an important time in the patent life through this project. The other one is a national filing at 30 months, where You need to think carefully where your marketplace is, where you intend to sell your product. As I say, you can't file in every country, so you have to assess your market, the value of your markets, and file in those countries as required. Benefit of good IP management. This will be picked up again later in the next talk, but you know, your IP protects your ideas. It helps to form partnerships. You know, companies will not back a product unless it's got some protection. Let's say IP is very important in the commercialization process. So it's very important throughout the life of the project to maintain the value of the IP. So who owns the IP? NIHR like to see a single owner. It makes their life a lot simpler. What they ask for is, what's the existing IP, which is background IP? What's likely to be produced? So what's the potential of new IP being developed, which is a foreground or a rising IP? And they're also aware that sometimes you need to use IP that is not owned by the applicants on the grant, which is third-party IP. In all cases, when you fill out your application form, they'll want to know how this IP is recognised, how it's captured, managed and utilised. And it's an important part of the project plan when you do apply for funding. Now, an area that people sometimes have problems with is the freedom to operate. And what does it mean? Again, NIHR are very hot on this. They want to know that there's no reason for you to lose your claim to the product and its commercialization. So a freedom to operate search is really analysis to show that your product or technologies do not infringe on someone else's product and technology or their patent claims. At the applications phase, you are expected to indicate how you've looked at freedom to operate and what searches you've performed. Now, these at that stage can be in-house searches, and if you talk to your tech transfer office or your IP support, you can do simple keyword searches to find out what the marketplace, what the competition is, what patents are out there. There are free patent search sites online, such as SpaceNet and the Lens, where you can do your own searches. And this is very straightforward once you know the keywords that you're using. At some point in the project, you will be required to do a formal analysis. This is normally accepted at the stage where you're ready with a product for clinical evaluation or for scale up for manufacture. And at this point, it's also useful to do general searches for competitors and look at the market landscape. In fact, do this all the way through your project. Keep an eye on publications, conference proceedings, etc., because these will throw up any competitors who may infringe on your product as well as you infringing on theirs. An interesting thing to note is that freedom to operate search is a snapshot in time. So today you could do a full formal search, and in a week's time it could be totally different. So it's always good to carry out routine in-house searches to make sure freedom to operate is maintained. So you've generated your IP, you've got your freedom to operate, and this then leads you into the commercialization phase with licensing deals, investment potential, even startups and spin-outs. And I know this will be discussed further in the talks to follow, so I won't go into those here. So NIHR set out guidelines for commercialization. And what they want to know as part of your application and as you go through your project is what are the competitive technologies that exist in the market? And why is your technology different and better than what's already out there? They like to know how long it's going to take your product to reach the market and show patient benefit. And they assume that it's going to take longer than, shall we say, a 3-year project. And they also assume that you will find follow-on funding from either NIHR themselves, for example, for bigger clinical trials, but also you may have partners who want to invest in this. And this needs to be part of your strategy when you're putting it together. They want to know how you're going to adopt it into a healthcare service. This will be talked about by Tim Robinson in the final talk today, so I'll leave that for now. They also want to know the route to market and any hurdles, whether they're regulatory, manufacturing hurdles, whatever they are, who's going to solve those as part of your team, and all this should go into your application. So in terms of market assessment, a few pointers. One is the product relevant to the market? A lot of researchers, and I've done this in the past, have come up with really nice ideas, but they're not relevant to the marketplace and do not satisfy the NHS or patient benefit. So make sure that your product is relevant to that market that you're aiming for. Also, does your product fill an unmet need? Sometimes the marketplace is full of Me Too type products, and to try and get into that is very difficult and probably not worth it. So it's good to find a market where you can lead the way, shall we say. There's a definite unmet need that needs to be solved, and this leads on to requiring there to be an impact on the healthcare delivery or the healthcare service, improving on how things are done. So from that point of view, it should offer good value for money, and this includes cost benefit and cost effectiveness, and it should offer patient benefit. And I keep saying this, but you should always keep an eye on who the competitors are in your market assessment. In terms of route to market and the commercial strategy, it's good to identify your stakeholders early on. Your main ones are, for example, your customers, who are the NHS, and your patients. Keep them on board as you develop your strategy. Your manufacturers and distributors are there to help. Your investors are there as part of this strategy as well. And as in the market assessment, look for your competitors here. Make sure your market assessment is performed so that you can build up that strategy and you know that you're not competing. Ensure your IP is protected in your key markets. As I mentioned earlier, you can't cover every country, so it's good to identify where your key markets are. This could be UK, Europe, and US, for example, and they're the ones you should concentrate on, and that's part of your market assessment. You need to decide on your route to market. Normally, NIHR like NHS adoption to be the primary route, but they do understand that there's a much broader healthcare market out there. But you need to work out the route to get into those markets and be realistic on the timing to enter the market. A lot of people say, oh, we'll do 3 years and then we'll be there. It normally takes at least twice that just to get into the NHS service, let alone into the broader healthcare market. So be realistic on your routes. And as I say, this is all part of your application at the beginning. So key areas to consider, and I'm sure these will be picked up on in the following talks. IP. make sure you know who owns the IP, make sure appropriate agreements are in line with NHR policy, and that all parties agree to those to who owns and what's going to happen to the IP when you do commercialize. Keep an eye on the competitive landscape and make sure you've got freedom to operate. And as part of your exploitation plan, make sure you've got a good route to market and NHS adoption. Make sure that the IP fits in with your commercialization strategy. They do go hand in hand. And part of the commercialization does require regulatory, health economics, and clinical evaluation. And these were covered in the last session, so I'm not covering them here. And all this will lead on to potential sources of onward investment and enhance your chance of getting them. So to conclude, your initial ideas on IP and commercialization should be at the pre-award stage. So this should be part of your application. As you go through your project, you should be continuing to protect your IP, IPR, and keep gaining evidence to work towards your commercialization and adoption plan, as outlined in the box below. And at the end of your project, you should be able to come up with a realistic and finalized IP and commercialization plan. So at that point, I will say thank you. And if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. And I will now like to pass over to James Finney and Carl Edwards, who will now look at more deeply into what I've sort of presented so far, but give a better overview on the importance of IP and good commercial strategy planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy.
Right, can people tell me if the slides come up?
I can see them from my side.
Excellent.
Okay. Super. So, should we go to the next slide and introduce ourselves, Carl?
If we must.
So, do you want to go first, Carl, and then?
No, go on.
Just want to say hello to everybody on the webinar this afternoon. Just a quick 30 seconds about myself, and then Carl will introduce himself. But I'm James Finney, and I'm a project manager of the Leicester Life Sciences Accelerator. I'm actually a medical microbiologist by training, but I've spent a large part of my career actually working commercially, driving innovations forward. So I've worked both to market access in pharmaceuticals and medtech, and I've also managed a number of Innovate UK projects in the last few years. So I've got quite a broad background around sort of commercializing both health technologies, pharma, etc. What I'm going to talk around today is sort of the wider sort of contextualization around innovation and what you need to sort of think of the different parts. And then Carl will go do a deeper dive into some of the clear aspects of IP, etc. But do you want to introduce yourself, Carl?
Hi, I'm Carl Edwards. I'm currently commercial manager at University of Leicester, dealing with Precision Medicine Institute. My previous experience includes commercial consulting, technology transfer. I worked in the NHS, IP, worked up in Nottingham. Some of you probably know me. I kind of looked at the list and saw some names I recognise. And I'll kind of bring up the second half of this with a kind of mazy dribble through the kind of world of IP, trying to pick out some non-medical examples as well as medical ones.
Thanks, Carl. Could you go to the next slide and, well, actually 2 slides on, and then I'll start my part of the presentation. Okay, so I just wanted to just take a few moments to sort of think around sort of innovation, because a lot of what we're talking around today is actually developing new products, and actually sometimes services, or sometimes can be a mixture of both. But what is sometimes not addressed actually is sort of what innovation actually is. Now, many people will use sort of the word, oh, this is innovative, or that's a really that's innovation. Now, there are different forms of innovation, and what I just want to sort of contextualize here is that actually, depending on where you're working or the application that you're trying to do, it can actually, innovation can be different. So I've worked within organizations previously where I've actually put in a sort of an innovation system to actually drive forward innovation, both in the products, but also in the organizations themselves. And very much what we try to do is sort of like define the different sorts of innovation. So most people will sort of see sort of incremental innovation. So that's where, say, as you normally see with the iPhone. So you used to have the iPhone 1 and we're now at the iPhone 13, but sort of each year it's a sort of a new iterative development of that. I'll just stop just for a second. What you can sort of see on the right is what I call the sort of the innovation matrix, and it's basically in relation to sort of the technologies and the customer need. Now, the customer need can be in. This is probably a little bit more from a commercial standpoint, but can sort of how much it would change the market. So you could say if we were to introduce sort of flying cars or other things like that. And now I realise that's outside of the context of this talk, but it is sort of worth to sort of think, because actually you could have something that is innovative of a new design, maybe a bed, but inherently it is still a bed. But if that's either, say, cheaper, or it could maybe get rid of pressure sores, that it would be innovative in its application. So generally, incremental innovations, as I've said, they can be, you would see them in form of sort of line extensions of products. So maybe going from, say, if a person needed a tablet every day, you could go to maybe a weekly or, say, monthly tablet or injection. Two that are sort of less talked about are sort of the market breakthrough and the technology breakthrough. Now, the market breakthrough is that's a new business model that utilizes existing technology. So that could be, rather than so this could be seen within the NHS, rather than having to make sort of a capital cost of say buying a new MRI scanner or something like that. It could actually be go into a sort of new service model, or say subscription as a service, so that people pay monthly to use that scanner. And then a technology breakthrough is sort of say some technology that's used in another sector and then is actually brought over to say within the health space or another sector within that. Disruptive is probably what has the most impact. So this would say, using Apple as an example, that would be the introduction of the iPad. So there actually was a market sector before that of touch screen computers, but albeit they weren't very good, where Apple came in, developed the iPad, and even if it wasn't the best performing, they had the whole ecosystem, marketing and everything around that to sort of drive that forward. Now, what I've just wanted to plant the seed within this presentation is sort of the different ways of innovation. Now, not one is better than the other, and actually sometimes small incremental innovations can have just as much impact as a disruptive innovation. But it is the disruptive innovations that are the harder ones to achieve, but may have the most impact if they come off. Could you have the next slide, please, Carl? So the next slide just shows an array of just sort of different products that or services that I use. So I'm wearing a pair of Bose headphones that are noise cancelling. They could be seen as sort of an incremental innovation from the previous pair of noise cancelling, but actually these are wireless, so they're good. I've got a Peloton. What could see is a change of that could be deemed as a breakthrough innovation, because it's sort of bringing exercise at home in a very connected way and the Internet of Things. And then you've got the COVID jab there. So what I just want to sort of say is that there are different sorts of innovation, and you can go into sort of the different levels. And all around this, there's different layers of IP that is based around those. So there might be sort of explicit IP and actually that's been developed purely for that product, but most likely there will be sort of background IP bringing in that. Could I have the next slide, please, Carl? Now, what I want to sort of just illustrate, and I do apologize if this is a little bit of a busy slide, but actually not all innovations make it to market. Now, that's not to say that it's bad, because actually there is, within innovation, there is a thinking called the fail fast approach. And that is very much sort of at the early stage, try something maybe in a proof of principle or a proof of concept, and then to actually triage the sort of the innovations that won't work. Now, this is a quite important one. A lot of people will not have heard of this, or may have heard of it sort of en passing, but it's around the sort of the TRL or technology readiness level. So basically, these define sort of whereabouts a technology is. So very much, if we're talking about, oh, I've got an idea, it's either at a desk or in the lab, that is very much sort of TRL 1. So it's a very early stage idea. So if you move forward, it then progresses up to sort of TRL 9. Now that would be something sort of out, purely out in the market and then embedded. So that's very much sort of an iPhone. If something new was to be released, that would sort of be around on the TRL 8 level. Now this is sort of important because actually, as you can sort of see the 3 different domains in there, very much sort of TRL 1 and 3 inherently have been sort of within the sort of the universities. It's sort of in the sort of the 3 to 4 in the Venn diagram, where it then starts to move to sort of the innovation, and you may start to apply for Innovate UK funding and the like to actually, and more sort of private collaboration, so that you've actually got, so you've made sort of one prototype at the lab, you can sort of show that works, and then you need to go into proof of concept to show that it works. And then once you've then made that prototype and done the testing and show that it does work, it's then working with either contract manufacturers or the like to actually get it out to commercial market and get regulation and testing. While this is different between every sector, there are all challenges there, and you do need to have, I think early on, what are the challenges you're likely going to face later on down the sort of the value stream that is placed. So if you can quite easily make 1 or 2 examples in a lab, and maybe make sort of 10 or 20, say, widgets. If a consumer, well, like a customer like the NHS, they need 10,000. Do you have the scale and capability to do that? So that you all need to think about that. And that is very much sort of defined in the sort of the route to market, what sort of generally defines TRL 6. I've made mention about sort of risk here. And generally, if you already have a product, and say if you had a wired product and it goes to wireless, and that's a small incremental innovation, that would be the lowest risk. But actually, if you had a self-powered, self-generating, that never needs to be plugged in robot that can just power itself, that would be a disruptive innovation. So that would be the highest risk. I'm just using that as an example. Where I talk about sort of triage and very much sort of thinking around the fail fast approach that I haven't mentioned on the slide, but it is worth having a little look around that. There is a sort of a concept called the Valley of Death. And this is sort of, so, and you'll have heard this, and a lot of people come up with good examples. Or when I was younger, I used to watch Tomorrow's World, and there used to be lots of nice examples of ideas and technologies there, but they'd never actually get to market. In essence, it's because it's very hard to go over the sort of between the sort of this TRL 6 to 8, and many technologies fail at 7. The fail fast approach way of thinking thinks about, actually, don't progress to that point if you know it's not going to happen. Sort of triage earlier. So there are ways that you can sort of mitigate the valley of death, and that's actually to sort of look to sort of de-risk. And that's actually one of the ways that the program that I manage at the University of Leicester can actually work with companies to actually de-risk that. So can I have the next slide, please? So I'm the project manager of the Leicester Life Sciences Accelerator, and very much what we can do is, if a company within Leicester or Leicestershire has a problem that they want to solve, we can actually, we're an ERDF supported project, so we can offer up innovation support for free to actually work with that company, so that they can work with our Leicester's academics and clinicians to basically solve that problem, whether it's either through sort of the application of data science, clinical trials, or sort of the wider innovation support and development. We have quite a broad breadth of projects that we can work on. Carl, can I have the next slide, please? that are very much based around sort of Leicester's strengths within the life sciences. So I've just put this slide up just to sort of show the main 6 departments and areas that we have at our disposal within the LSSA, and each of these are world leaders in their field. So at the moment, we've got a very active pipeline of companies that we're working from, both from medical devices to the application of medical AI to sort of novel pathological screening techniques. So if you have got a problem, we may be able to sort of signpost you to academics or clinicians within these departments. Can I have the next slide, please, Carl? Yeah, so this is very much what we can offer. So based upon Leicester's strengths, and as I mentioned, we can offer sort of collaboration. We can offer the access to experts, or actually just to navigate through. So sometimes people have a great idea, and there's many different channels to actually that people could go through. And say taking a real options reasoning approach, we could maybe able to signpost people to navigate the questions that they've got, so that they can actually drive that product to market, whether that's giving sort of advice on securing IP, actually attaining funding, or actually sense checking with an expert to actually see if their idea and service is tangible. And lots of other things in between that sort of fit around this. So we can offer 2 forms of projects. One is a very short, smart project. So we try to deliver that with an academic within sort of 12 hours of support. And then we can actually do more intensive projects that can actually be up to 120 hours of support. And these are free for companies or entrepreneurs within the Leicester and Leicestershire region. Can I have the next slide, please, Carl? And this is just a background of the LSSA team. So we're led by the academic director, that Professor Toru Suzuki, that is a consultant cardiologist at UHL Leicester, but is very interested in entrepreneur and innovation within the life sciences space. There's myself, and then I've got 2 colleagues, Dr. Helen de Crez and Manish Anazani. So we're a well-rounded multidisciplinary team of innovation professionals to drive forward your problems, and also signpost if you do have problems with IP or commercialization. So I realize that was quite quick from me, but if there's any questions, please ask me then, and I'll hand over to Carl.
Thanks, James. There we go. That's me. Right, as I said, I work at the University of Leicester. I do some tech transfer there as well. And this is going to try and kind of go through IP and different ways of looking at IP. You know, having a patent or having a copyright is one thing, but it's how they don't exist like scientific papers to be admired from afar. They exist to make some money. So this was not the size of your IP, but actually how you use it. So a good example of IP and inventorship is to look at something kind of non-technical. So everybody remembers Edwin Starr for War. What is it good for? The thing is, the IP in that, well, it won awards, inducted into Grammy Hall of Fame. Who actually got the money? And if you follow the money, Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong. The IP determines kind of the value of the idea, so how you can derive things from it. So they not only earned all the money from Edwards Starr's version, but they earned the lion's share of the money from the other performing artists, because as a writer you tend to receive 60% of the royalties. So you know, it's not just owning it, it's not just controlling it, it's actually what you actually use it for. So it's got to be worth money. So you can have IP on anything. you can patent anything. I mean, as a hay fever sufferer, I have to say that the toilet roll dispenser as a hat, to be honest, actually, I'd probably buy one. But it's not a mass market device. So they protect the right to use and sell some things. But if no one buys it, what's the point of doing it? IP also costs money to maintain. So actually, if no one's buying it, the IP is actually worth less than nothing because it's costing you money. And also you need to look at, it doesn't have to be complicated. IP and your product, if it's protected, doesn't have to be complicated. Everybody's seen Post-it notes. The origin of Post-it notes, why were Post-it notes yellow? It was the cheapest offcuts of paper they had lying around at the time. Because this was a Skunk Works project with a failed adhesive patent that they were going to drop. Oh, sorry, not my camera. Failed adhesive patent that we're going to drop, an internal bootleg development, and people still buy Post-it notes. Interestingly, people still buy branded Post-it notes, despite the fact you can buy the almost identical products. People are not only just paying for the idea of a removable adhesive label, they're paying for the name, much like you will pay for designer goods, Gucci, Ralph Lauren, whatever. So actually how you build a successful product, the Post-it note being a case in point, look and feel, the patent, the brand actually moves directly over to how you might develop a life sciences based kind of product. So your IP, assuming it will be sold, has different values depending on how close it is to market. And kind of James has alluded to this in the technology readiness levels. The value of that IP climbs as you get towards the actual marketed product. There'll be a prize at the end if anybody recognizes the drug structure. Now, I don't know whether you can put the drug structure in chat. So the therapeutic development is it a basic drug structure of a drug class? That's worth something. Is it the final drug structure, which is significantly different? The final drug structure is metabolically stable, it's not toxic, all this kind of thing. The other thing is it needed to make the final drug? So is it an excipient? Is it something you dissolve the drug in? And then is it needed to deliver the final drug? So inhalers being a case in point, somebody owns the IP on inhalers and they provide that IP for a charge to major manufacturers of inhaled drugs. They don't have to be drug manufacturers to do that. All they have to do is make a product that people want to use. And with the more recent developments in the pandemic, how you deliver things like vaccines and injectable products, drug delivery systems like the one pictured are going to end up commanding significant values. We're not going to be stuck with vaccines that are only stable at -80. That mRNA technology will be transferred to something like dry powder, and then you're going to need vaccines that you can mail out. Just in normal post, no refrigeration. And that's, if you have that delivery system, you can take something out of that value chain because of your IP. So there's usually not one thing that protects a successful product and not one piece of IP that derives value. This is better when there's kind of audience interaction. So this is actually a drug company's kind of layered IP on the top drug, which is a patent. It covers a technical innovation. The bottom is actually a registered design right. Nobody else is allowed to make a pill that looks like that. Now, the chemists amongst you will recognize the top bit is sildenafil, also known as Viagra. Anybody now making sildenafil tablets is still excluded from making little blue pills like Pfizer does, because Pfizer have protected the design rights and the look and feel. So even if you're selling sildenafil, it will have to look different. People will know it's not the Pfizer drug. You can't pass off as Pfizer's Viagra. And again, people buy into that name, like people still buy real Post-it notes, people still buy real Viagra rather than a generic version. So again, it's that layers of protection also add layers of value. The other thing is, because there's layers of values and layers of protection, are you going to do everything yourself, or are you going to try and share it aloud? And I've got two very different, differentially successful British innovators here. Both inventions worked, except Dyson went on to make billions and billions of pounds because he had a commercial plan. Yeah. So you need a commercial outlet as well as a ideological outlet. That's the important thing. And James kind of alluded to this, as did Roy. It's all right to have a good idea, but unless you protect it and exploit it commercially, it simply stays a good idea and doesn't make you any money. The thing is, it's like IP is an entity. It's a thing that you own, that you exploit, that you earn money from. The thing is, how do you do that? And the clue is in the name. So it's property, just like a house. You can rent it out or license it, buy the room. So maybe you've got a patent that covers multiple drugs. So you can license some drugs to some people, some drugs to other people, or you can license the entire thing. You can sell it outright, which is assignment, or you can share it like a shared house. And all these things come with different levels of commitment, burden, or risk. So in licensing, just like renting a house, you've got to get your tenants to pay the rent. So they've got to tell you when they've sold things that you own a piece of. And you've also got to persuade them not to trash the place, because people who are exploiting your IP can run the risk of actually invalidating it if they do things wrong. You can assign it, which is great. You sell it one-off. But what happens if the market goes up? You've got a chance of regret that you actually sold too soon and didn't get enough money. And the worst of all possible worlds is a shared piece of IP, a shared patent particularly. So imagine a shared house forever. Shared ownership of patents particularly is very painful. You need both owners to sign off on everything. It kind of doubles your patenting costs effectively on the admin side. So it's much better to have one person own it or one entity own it and have a revenue share agreement rather than just splitting it down the middle. I actually manage a shared patent and it takes hours of my life. The other thing is, use it or lose it. So if you've got IP and you're not, or you decide, actually, I can't make enough of these things, I'm going to license it. Which was the JVC model for VHS. Sony developed the Betamax and said, we are the only company in the world that can possibly make this. We are going to keep it to ourselves. It's brilliant. They were right. Betamax was an industry standard and was well into the 21st century. However, commercially, JVC simply licensed it to anybody who would make it. And this is why we don't live in a Betamax universe. The licensing of a technology to multiple partners increases your revenue, reduces your organizational risk or your personal risk as well, to either increased manufacturing costs or the fact that somebody comes in with something cheaper, not necessarily better. VHS was never better than Betamax, but they made a fortune off it. Kind of drifting away again from medical IP because some of these examples are easy to do. So This is one of my favourite ones. Going back to the design right of Viagra, in this case, this was Dilly is a Budweiser owned trademark. But a local brewery, a kind of microbrewery, decided to make its own beer. Now, it sounds quite strange, but it didn't threaten Budweiser. Nobody would ever mistake it for Budweiser, really. But Budweiser, if they hadn't have defended it, they would lose all the rights worldwide to that that design and trademark. The interesting thing is how they did this. So instead of just sending a solicitor's letter, they actually sent a kind of medieval squire to read out the judgment in the middle of the bar, sent a TV crew, and everybody went, "Oh, well done," and applauded them for protecting their IP. I commend you to Marks and Spencer's behaviour towards Lidl recently on the subject of Colin the Caterpillar. They attempted to enforce their IP rights. They didn't come off looking very good. So enforcement of IP rights might be necessary, but how you do it really matters. The thing is, this is one of the simpler ones. If we want to get complicated, if you look at Oncommune, spin out from the University of Nottingham, they started off with 7 patent families. Now they're managing a portfolio with 136 patent applications in 36 countries. This is where management of IP becomes a full-time job for any organization. And if you're going to grow your organization, this is something you should decide, is this where I want to go? Or do I want to get rid of my company or spin out or license an opportunity before it gets complicated? University of Leicester have got a number of patents in our name that are actually funded by companies who own them and just support their prosecution. And I think it's about 120 patents that are in our name, but are actually paid for by other people. And that sort of thing, it starts with 1 patent filing, and you can imagine just how expensive that gets. Anyway, thank you, and questions.
Well, thank you, James and Carl. That was really interesting talk, or talks, I should say. A lot to get the mind going of our listeners, I hope. Please, if you've got any questions for Carl and James, can you put them in the chat and we'll pick them up later at the Q&A session. Thank you again, Carl and James. That was excellent. I'd like to move on now and introduce Tim Robinson from East Midlands AHSN, who has got the privilege of ending this series of seminars with a look at commercialisation and adoption. So over to you, Tim. Thank you.
Hi, Roy. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. My name's Tim Robinson. I am the Commercial Director at East Midlands AHSN. I'll come back to the organisation later on, but a little bit about me. I started my life working in the NHS, but then I've spent most of my career in the commercial sector in customer-facing roles for software businesses providing solutions to the NHS, roles such as sales and marketing, business development, marketing, and product management. And in the Q&A section, I'll be supported by my colleague Julian, who's got very similar background and experiences. Before I jump into my slides, which I'm just going to start, I will just get those up. 1 second. It would help if I could find the right button. I do apologise, using very different platforms every day can sometimes get a little bit confusing. Not for a second. So I'm hoping that you can now see that slide, which has got a nice purple colour to it. Roy, I'm looking for a nod from you to see if you can see that.
That's good, Tim.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So before I start off with, I would like all of you to get out your phone or open up another tab on your browser, because I've got some questions that I would like to ask you. So we're going to use Slido. Hopefully some of you will have used this before. Number of ways you can access it. You can either open up your camera on your phone, take a picture of the QR code, and that will take you straight to the right survey, or you can go to slido.com and enter 818073. So I'll just give you a second to get to that. And I've got 3 simple questions that I'm going to ask you. So, question 1. Which can you do faster, speak or type? So that's the first question. I'll give a bit longer on this one because people are still getting to the right place on the app. Hopefully people are, is anybody having any trouble getting there? Are we, is everybody, I'm using Roy as my guinea pig. I can see his camera so I can see where he's at in the process.
I'm having trouble, Tim.
What's not working?
I can't get into Sligo.
All right.
Might be my phone, actually.
Has anybody managed to get in? Please come off silent. Don't be scared.
On the screen, Tim, it says,
no
30 people have responded so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, no issues.
Yep.
Real.
No problem.
Oh, it's me. Sorry.
And then second question is, speaking is easier than typing. And then the last question, I use the speech to text function in MS Word. Real. We've got 30 people. That's great. Thank you very much. So they say never work with live software, children or animals, and for some reason I can't see the results. Which is kind of not very helpful, but just give me 1 second. I will just log in. So on the first one, which can you do faster, speak or type? 90% of people said speak, 10% said type. Some fast typers there. Speaking is easier than typing. 93% agreed with that, 7% disagreed. I use the speech to text function in Microsoft Word. 3% said yes, 97% said no. So the point of that exercise really was, why are people not using Dictate, which is the speech to text function in Microsoft Word? It's a great solution. It's cross-platform. You can use it on whatever platform you want. It supports multiple languages. There's online guides. It's easy to set up. It's free. It's included within Microsoft Word. It's got direct access from within Word. You don't need any third-party plugins. And it's ranked the #1 speech-to-text solutions for Microsoft users by TechRadar. So why do we think people are not using that? If you just hold that thought, again, using Slido, I want people to add keywords or short statements as to why people think that they don't use dictate, the speech to text function in Microsoft Word. So it's just words, short statements to give us that insight. And on your screen, you should be able to see as you're in there, a word cloud building up. Somebody showing their age there with a reference to Mr. Clippy. Great. Some very valid and great insights coming through there. I mean, quite commonly, one of the ones that's there is that I don't know it exists. So knowledge around the product. I don't have the right version of Word. The difference between spoken and written language and how that sometimes gets translated. Some of the other areas around environmental, you can't speak in when you're in an open plan office. My work's confidential, I can't speak it out loud. There is limited evidence about, is it more efficient, a way of doing things? And the point I was trying to make is for each of these things that you've highlighted here, there'll be similar barriers that you'll have to face in the commercialization and adoption process for the innovation that you're developing. People are often skeptical about new ideas, innovation and development, and why shouldn't they be? So part of your job is to build trust and credibility with the people that you need to build that with and bring them along the journey. Obviously, it makes perfect sense to you why a team or a department or an organization should adopt the innovation that you're developing, and you need to help them understand how they can do that and what benefits they can expect. Thank you for that, it's really insightful. A key way that you can do this is to understand the processes or pathways, patient pathways, clinical pathways that your innovation sits within or has an impact on. And this really is crucial to helping support your planning around commercialization and adoption. And what I'm going to do over the next few slides is just demonstrate this using an abstract example. Not quite as exciting as some of the examples in the IP presentation. So this one is around coffee, which is something that I know a little bit about and less about clinical. So understanding the answer to these questions is key to building your adoption plan, because it forms the foundation of what you're going to do. So this is a very simplified pathway for making coffee. And what I'm going to do is look at the way in which different types of innovation have an impact on this pathway and some of the considerations that you might need to make. So I'm not going to go through that. You can read that. It's a simple 4-step pathway that produces 1 cup of coffee. So the first innovation proposition is a new type of coffee granule that's cheaper, tastes better, and is produced ethically. So what does that do to the pathway? So in this kind of what I call a substitution innovation, it doesn't actually change the pathway. As you can see, still 4 steps, and there is no real difference, and the output is still the same. So on a positive side, there is no pathway change, which should in theory make it simpler to implement, and that should reduce the number of stakeholders that you've got to influence. On the negative side, low impact can make it harder to get attention, and we're not having any impact on the output. So one of the questions might be, well, why are we doing it? In this kind of scenario, you are going to be very reliant on the features of the product, because actually the product does the same thing. It's just that it's got qualities around it that make it more appealing. And you could argue for some instances that it falls into that almost nice to do rather than essential category. On the next one, start with the same pathway. What we're introducing in here is a new device. So in this instance, it's a cafetiere that makes better tasting coffee in bigger volumes and increases efficiency. So if we want to embed this into the pathway, what does that do? Well, actually, it does make changes. We've got a new device. It's got additional steps. So what does that mean? So although we're increasing the output, we're getting 6 cups now out of this process, and you've got potential efficiencies associated with that. On the downside, we've got a new product, so we're going to need training. We've got a new pathway because there's additional steps. We've got more stakeholders that we're going to need to influence and convince that this is the right thing to do. There's a potential for waste. We might always want 6 cups, but it produces 6. And then we've got to consider in the upfront cost for the device. So cost starts to play a bigger part in this and the business case. And finally, on the final one, we've got a proposition which is an all-in-one vending machine providing a range of coffees and other hot drinks, which is an ordering is via and payment is via an app. So this is kind of more into the disruptor tech space. So the pathway has been obliterated. I mean, it's totally different. And so from a positive point of view, we're getting more choice of drinks, a better user experience, potentially, potential time savings, and perhaps some cost savings over time. On the downside, we've got a high upfront investment. We might see a shift in workload to different groups because this machine's probably going to need maintaining, cleaning, whereas a kettle, which was in the original pathway, is kind of self-maintaining and has got limited maintenance requirements associated with it. There might be uncertainty around the transition from a very well-established, simple pathway to a more complex innovation. And again, highlighting an area, you might be increasing digital inequalities because this assumes that everybody's got access to a phone that would support them being able to get a drink. So I know they're kind of slightly abstract, but I think it was useful to actually use that to highlight the fact that you need to understand the pathway so that you understand where your innovation fits with it and how that's going to affect the pathway or the way of working that people are currently doing. And that's going to have a major impact on what your plan looks like. So once you understand the pathway, you can get a better understanding of the stakeholders that you're likely to need to support and influence across that. So not all of the stakeholders will be directly involved in the pathway, but might also be part of the wider decision-making and sign-off process. So including that might be finance and procurement, IT. So when you're looking at innovation, think who's going to use it, who's going to benefit from it, who's going to pay, and who's going to make the decision to purchase. And unless you're selling to one person, it's probably going to be more than one person that is. Oh, that wasn't meant to happen. I will come back to you. My PowerPoint has just crashed and shut down that down. Just give me 1 second to get that back up. 1 second. Let's get to the right slide. We were on that one. Roy, give me a nod if we're back on the stakeholder slide.
Yes, you're fine.
Thank you very much. Apologies for that glitch in my IT there. So, as I was saying, unless you're selling to one person, then that's likely to be more than one person or a group, and that needs to be thought through in your plan. I think one of the key messages that I wanted to try and get across today as well was that it's never too early to start your planning. There's no point in waiting until you get to level 8 or 9 to start thinking about how you're going to spread and adopt the solution. If you're looking at these kind of funding opportunities, you're probably at kind of at level 3 or 4. And it's likely that at this stage in your journey, many of the things that you would put forward are based on either assumption or logic or some limited customer feedback, stakeholder feedback. And as you progress through the journey, you need to be able to firm up those assumptions, back them up with evidence, provide more certainty to your claims and statements that support your innovation. So the quote at the bottom is shamelessly pinched from Guinness, which is a variation of another one. There is no glory in preparation, but without preparation, there is no glory. So being prepared for your commercialization activities will make a massive difference to the speed at which you can then start to generate income from the efforts and work that you have made. So on this slide, I thought it'd be useful to highlight the kinds of resources and artifacts that the Academic Health Science Network would expect to see when an innovation is being signaled as ready for adoption or spread or scale up. This list does come with a warning. So one, not all of these might be needed. And at the other end of the scale, having everything on this list does not guarantee success. It just increases the chances of achieving adoption at scale and pace. So what support is available? East Midlands AHSN is one of 15 AHSNs that cover the whole of England. And we have a range of schemes, initiatives, activities that are available to support. So there is some slight overlap with some of the things that are available through the Leicester Life Sciences Accelerator that we heard around earlier on. But I think that they're more complementary than competitive. We have a series of webinars which we hold with Q&As which are on key topics. Many of the things that I've talked about today are covered in that series of webinars. We are launching a new series running from January 2022, so we'll be sending out information about those. Those are free of charge and available to anybody in the East Midlands or wider. We also have a Pre-Accelerator program, which is a 2.5-day program which runs 3 times a year to support people with customer discovery, developing their business value proposition, talked about commercialization, identifying funding. Those are very popular. The next one's in February 2022. And if anybody's interested, we can provide information about that. Again, that's free of charge, but there are limited places. Sorry, there is a limit on the number of places that are available on each cohort. And finally, there are practical support. So we work with people who are putting together bids to develop work packages to include bidding around commercialization and adoption strategies. And finally, how do I get that support? So the route into East Midlands AHSN is via a standard engagement form, which is hosted on our website. This gets you into our processes for support. and gets you registered within our system. If you're not from the East Midlands, you can still come to us, but you might want to work with an AHSM that's closer to home for you. I can't guarantee that they'll have exactly the same support offers available, but they'll have something similar or alternatives. And if you want to do that, you can go to the National AHSM Innovation Exchange site, and you can find the AHSM that's nearest to you. Everybody uses the same engagement form, so the information that you'll be asked for should be the same. And I will stop there, and we think we're moving next into back to Roy to move us into Q&A session, I think.
Right, thank you, Tim. Very interesting. It's really nice to see non-medical examples as well. It really brings home the message. So thank you, Tim, and thank you, Carl and James, for your contribution as well. If anybody's got any questions, please put them in the chat now, and we will move on to the Q&A